Let's now talk about cost management and reporting. This is certainly a very important topic. And to start, I think your number one tool is this one right here, the Azure Pricing Calculator. If you go to the Azure Pricing Calculator, what you can do is have an idea of how much your infrastructure will cost you. There are some costs that might vary, such as the usage of network bandwidth, but in most cases, you can get a pretty accurate view of and prediction of how much costs your AKS cluster and all the revolving products there and services that you use in Azure will cost you. If we go here, you can see there is a button here that says Azure Kubernetes Service. If you just click in there, you can then estimate. There's a few interesting things to look into what we have here. Well, the number one is this. There is really no charge, and I'm going to highlight this in here. We're not charging anything for the management of the cluster. So when you do go with AKS, and it's as it says right there, you're not paying for all the management that we do on our behalf there. So that's one thing, and you can see it in here. You choose a region, so let's say we're going with, so in my case here, I'm gonna say Canada East, and then you can start plugging in some of the information around the nodes. Imagine that you decided that you want to go with, let's say, oh, I'll just leave this with what I have here. So a D2 V3, 2 vCPUs and 8 gigs of RAM. And you can say how many virtual machines you want and for how long that's going to run on a month. You can see here I have per hours, day, month. And this will give you an idea of how much this would cost you at the end of the month. Now, there are other things here to take care. So let's suppose we're getting 3 VMs in here, but the way you can save money and you can play with these numbers here. One of the things you can do is if you know your workload will run for a long time. So let's say we're doing a project that will certainly run for an entire year or 3 years. You can use reserve instances, and you can see there's savings that will go right into the total cost of the cluster there. Now, other options like what kind of managed OS disks you have will also show here in the cost. And again, if we're going for production, I'd certainly go for an uptime SLA. You can choose how many clusters you have in there, and you get a cost after that. Now, if you're not doing production, you really don't need that SLA. An SLO might be just enough for your dev and test environment. But if you do need, it's there as an option as well. So this will give you like a good idea. And with that, you can also come back here and say you're using Cosmos or App Service with AKS. You can plug all that together, and at least this will give you a very solid ballpark of, okay, this is how much it will probably cost us to run this in dev or in production. And you can see that I have the drop down for the regions there, so you can simulate the various regions that you're going to be deploying that, which is certainly something you should take into consideration there. The other option you might have, if your workload supports, is to use a spot node pools. With spot VMs, you can also save some money there. So you create a node pool that the SKU is based on spot VMs. Again, that's another option. So you probably have a few ways to tweak this here for you. Remember that setting up our scaler will also save you. You want to make sure that what you're doing here is right fitted for your workload versus buying something that is extra large that you really don't need. So don't go and do that. Instead, and that'll be my second point here. Take a look at what we have described in the Microsoft Azure WellArchitected Framework. And one of the topics we have there under cost optimization is exactly that. So you build, you measure, and you learn from it. By that is, start small, go with the basic requirement. So, we've talked about how many nodes and the SKU of the nodes that we recommend for the system node pool. So a DS2 V2 with 3 nodes. Go with that. That's for the system node pool. Now for your workload, that will certainly vary. We don't know, beforehand what the workload will be, so we can't really provide that recommendation. But the minimum would be a node pool, 2 nodes inside. The size of those nodes will vary. Start small, build up, make a baseline, and then incrementally add more things after that. Autoscaler is awesome. It will give you that. Horizontal pod autoscaling will give you the capacity of having a lot of pods concentrating and running in a single node. That's certainly what you want. You don't want to have just a few pods running in the nodes, because what's going to happen is you end up underutilizing that node. So you're paying for a VM that you're not really making full use of. So HPA, autoscaler, and then you build your baseline with that. And make sure you have a way to gather information and metrics from your cluster. So Azure Monitor is one of the things that I showed earlier, and I'll show another solution here in a second as well. With this here, what I want to bring to your attention is that a lot of the things that we talked about during this series of videos here are around the well-architected framework. In fact, if you go in here and if you explore, we have this little menu here on the side. If you go down into operational excellence here, it's really all we've talked about so far. From development, deployment, to infrastructure deployment, monitoring performance, it's all there. Just to illustrate, if we go and take a look at infrastructure deployment, you can see we talked about things like ARM templates, Terraform, Ansible, and others. This is certainly a very interesting guide and the backbone for all the things we're doing here. We talked about it's a lot more than I could cover on these videos, so I highly recommend this as a reading that you should do after you've done with this series of videos. The last tool that I have here is the Microsoft Advisor. Now, the Advisor will give you a lot of interesting information. So from cost savings, which you can see here, I don't really have a lot, but I want to show you what it would come up had I had to do some optimizations on my side. To security, which you can see I have some security things that I have to change. Reliability, operational excellence, and performance. So they all go together. The well-architected framework will talk about what you can do. It will apply to all of our technologies. In fact, you can probably abstract a lot of that and apply to virtual machines only, or to the development. You can piece and choose what you want. The Advisor here will essentially take those recommendations, but it will be tailored for you, for your scenario, for your subscription, for the workload you have running in Azure. Take a look at this. A lot of times we want to understand, okay, how do I optimize my costs? That's certainly a common question. The Advisor will tell you that, will give you prescribed information and to the point. So if you click in here, and again, in my case, I don't have anything, but if you were to click here and see all of their recommendations, this will take you to this page where you have a long list of things that you can do, like reserved instances or deleting VMs that you don't need, using reserve capacity for SQL or for Cosmos. And you can see the list will go on and on. This will apply again for our AKS resources. So the Advisor is really a key tool that you should have as well. So you can either just type Advisor here and then go directly there, or if you go, let's say, to your Kubernetes service, so in my case here, my Alpha cluster, you can also get that information from here. That is an Advisor recommendation. In my case, it's specifically only to the security of this here, but you could also see some of the information that I show you there in here. You can see that I have a few other things in there. Now, the last thing I want to mention here is this. You can certainly go with what we have there. Another way to keep you in track is maybe to put a boundary of how much you're allowed to spend on this. So a way to do this is to set up a budget, and I'll link the description here to this video of how you can do that. But under cost management is where if you go there, you'll be able to come here and set up a budget. So with a budget, what you can do, and I think I might have one right here. Yep, you can see I have one, and you can see how much I've spent on mine. This will essentially trigger an email and say, hey, you've spent half of your budget already, and it's this time of the month. So that will give you an idea, so you're not caught by any surprise. So have a budget, put a budget in place as well, and then you can do these triggers to at least alert you of how much you're spending in the consumption that you have on a specific cluster, whether that's production or dev test. Again, for dev test, what you're probably looking for right now, if you go in here, you can see my cluster. You can see the node pools that I have. So right now, this one, I only have one node pool. It's a very small cluster. I'm not really doing anything. But dev and test, so this will probably be a good dev cluster. Dev and test do not need to be the same. You can have a lot of cost saving between the two of them. Keep in mind that when you go with a production cluster that spans multiple zones and regions, there might be extra cost just between the traffic between the zones. So take a look at that as well.